that thing down. Worries me a little bit. Okay, so I'm standing right in the middle of the presentation. Over here. That good? Everyone see? Alright, so I'm really excited to get to talk to you guys today about Paleo-Indians. Typically when I'm asked to talk to people about things, it's about bones. So I spent a lot of time talking to people about bones, so getting to talk to you about Paleo-Indians is really exciting. Paleo-Indians is one of those sexy topics. You know, you get to talk about Pleistocene megafauna, you get to talk about great big spear points, you get to talk about, you know, it's all sorts of good fun. So today what I'm going to talk to you about is a little bit about how we know what we know about Paleo-Indians, talk to you about a little bit about the history of Paleo-Indian research, talk to you about some of the major sites in Paleo-Indian archaeology, and then we're sort of going to finish up with some of the new stuff that's coming out more recently, just to sort of explore some of these new ideas. So let's just start off with a more familiar story here. So somewhere around, call it 14,000, 15,000 years ago, people sort of wandered their way across the Berry Land Bridge. Now, to call it a bridge is a little bit misleading. You can see where the green is on that that's probably 1,000 kilometers across, something like that. So wandering across the Berry Land Bridge would have seemed very much like wandering across much Siberia. And somewhere around 13,000 years ago, it started warming up. A nice little corridor opened up. So all these folk that were hanging out in Alaska come flowing down into North America through this ice-free corridor, spreading out into this virgin wilderness, where they find all of these lovely critters waiting for them to eat. In a very short period of time, roughly about 500 years or so, they have spread out across the entirety of North America, down into South America. So, this is sort of the current model as we know it, and this is the model that we're going to do some damage to tonight. Okay. So, some of these standard dates for Paleo-Indians are somewhere around 13,000 years ago for some of the early Paleo-Indian groups. Moving all the way up into about 8,000 years ago or so for the late Paleo-Indians. So it's really these early Paleo-Indian groups that we're gonna focus on here. So now there is some things associated with the quest for the first Americans, or this whole search for this, So you're gonna find that whenever you get into Paleo-Indian archaeology and look at this idea of the first Americans, that there really is something to be first, right? Because we all remember who's first. Like, for instance, the guy up in the corner in the astronaut suit. Who's this?
Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong. Okay? First man on the moon. We know who he is, right? What about this guy by the plane?
Chuck Yeager.
Chuck Yeager. First guy to break the sound barrier. Oh. All right. Guy in the corner there.
Ted Williams.
Ted Williams. All right, we'll give you that one. I just had to put him in there because not a good year to be a Red Sox fan, but oh well. Okay, so guy up in the corner there, Chuck Yeager, and we all know the one down in the other corner, right? That was supposed to be the gimme in case you didn't get anything else right. Okay, so we all remember who's first, and we all remember who's associated with who's first. So, how do we know what we know? Alright, in archaeology we've got a relatively limited amount of information to deal with. So, we've got our faunal remains, we've got our human remains, we've got our lithic technology. And we can tell a lot of different stuff based on these different data sets. So, faunal remains is one of the things that I specialize in. Here you can see we've got a couple of mammoth killed, we've got some big bison killed. Had to throw the bison in. And we can tell a lot about what Paleo-Indians are doing. We can tell about their hunting strategies. We can tell what they're eating. We can tell something about the environment that they're living in. Based on the species, on what bones are present, how much of a critter is there. So we can tell a lot about what's going on with Paleo-Indians there. Human remains are one of those things that it's really nice if we have them. It's really nice if we can study them. But what it comes down to is our sample is not good. The number of bones that we have, the number of skeletons that we have, some people place it somewhere around 20-ish, and that's spreading over several thousand years. So the guy up in the corner there is the spirit caveman, and the guy up here is Kennewick man. You've probably all heard about Kennewick, right? Alright, Kennewick. So, lithic technology is a lot of what I'm going to be spending time talking about tonight. Okay, because lithic technology is one of those things that, as long as someone doesn't pick it up and take it somewhere, it remains. So we get a chance to look at this. And when we talk about lithic technology, we can talk about what the assembly looks like. We can talk about some of these formal tools. This gives us an idea of cultural relations, gives us an idea of technologies and how people are making things. It gives us an idea about mobility when we start looking at the different kinds of stone and where it's coming from and where it's going. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk some about lithics.
I have a question. So,
sure.
Are you comfortable taking questions during, or do you want to hold up until after?
Sure.
Okay.
All right, so this is sort of a smorgasbord of Paleo-Indian points, both early, late, and some middle. One of the great things about giving an archaeology talk is that you get to put up lots of nice pictures like this. Okay, so over in the corner there we've got more of a later Eden style Paleo-Indian point. Down here we've got our Clovis. Let's go ahead. Well, just to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the things, some of the range of variety that we see in our Paleo-Indian points. So now let's start getting into some more specifics here. All right. This is our Clovis point. A really beautiful Paleo-Indian point. These are fluted, which means that there is a basal flake taken off. So the big indent you see at the base of that point, the concavity there, that's the flute. That is an extremely difficult flake to remove. I've made a number of projectile points. I always like carrying one around in my pocket every now and then, and I managed to break a lot of them trying to remove the flute. So it's a very distinctive Paleo-Indian point.
I have a good question.
Sure.
So, I mean, can you start by removing the flute and then build the rest around it, or do you have to start with the...
No, you have to, it's really one of the finishing points. So you can break it down. You can leave the pointy end. You can leave the pointy end sort of less finished. But once you get that flute on there, that's pretty much where your base is finished. And then you can go up and use the point, finish it out. So yeah, there's a lot of failures that we see around that point. Okay, let's go ahead. Okay, so this is a little bit later point. This is the Folsom point, and you'll notice on this one that the fluting technology has gotten really spectacular. The fact that they are running a flute up the entire face of that projectile point. This is extremely difficult. I have never been able to do that. My friend Ed here, he's broken a lot of stone. We just can't do that yet. We're working on it though. We're working on it. So this is okay. So those are some of our early Paleo-Indian points here. You'll notice that in the later period that we're looking at here, except for the Dalton down here in the corner, these things aren't fluted. You start to see long spear points, parallel flaking. Very nice stonework, but you don't see that distinctive flute point anymore.
So is that a regression? I mean, is this an improvement on the fluid ones, or is this?
I don't know that you can really call it an improvement or not. You know, I mean, they both do what they are supposed to do.
So why would somebody flute it in the first place? What's the advantage of that?
That's a real good question. A lot of people talk about it in terms of hafting methodology. So you thin out the base of your point so you can haft it onto the end of the spear. A lot of people talk about it in terms of bravado, as in sitting there and saying, "Look what I can do." I don't know. I kind of like the theory that it's a bunch of guys hanging out saying, "If I finish one of these things, then I got to go home and do work." I don't know. You know, hafting seems to be a good reason behind why flute, but they have pretty well without it. So another thing that we can tell by looking at the morphology of the different spear points is we can get a good sense at building a chronology. So we can get a sense of when these different point styles came about and when they sort of disappeared. So this gives us an idea of a diagnostic artifact. So when does this artifact come into play? When do we see it? How old is that site that artifact comes from? So this is northern Indiana. And this is a slightly different chronology. This is more of a Western chronology. This would be more similar to like your Hell Gap or your Wyoming sorts of chronology, your progression. So you can see they're a little bit different, but in both of them you see the Clovis and Folsom very much in the early stages. So, you know, who are these first Americans and what are they doing here? You know, so we've got a lot of questions about, a lot of them are pertaining to when did they arrive, where did they come from, and how did they get here? You know, other questions are, you know, what were they doing, what were they hunting, how are they living, how quickly did they spread out when they got here? So there's still a lot of questions that we're asking about paleontology. So history and the research associated with it. When Paleontologian research first started, it was very much intertwined with more of your paleontological research. So much of it was associated with the search for natural history specimens. Looking for Ice Age bison or mammoths or some of these great big megafauna that we typically associate with the early Paleontologian groups. At that time, much of archaeology really only thought that humans had been in North America for a few thousand years. There really was not much of a concept of the time depth of Native Americans in North America. So let's talk about some of the first sites. Okay? And begins. Okay, so some of these important sites that we're going to talk about are Folsom site, Dent site, Blackwater Draw, the Lander Mammoth site. Probably not going to talk much about Murray Springs, but Meadowcroft Rock Shelter and Monteverde certainly are going to come into play here. But let's go ahead and get started. Now, Dent, interestingly enough, was a Mammoth Hill site that was one of the earliest sites found. But actual research on this, intensive research on this site, actually didn't happen until after some of the earlier discoveries. Bonnie Pitlato writes that, that's Pitlato.
It's Pitlato.
It's Pitlato. She writes that if things were a little bit different, if things had happened a little bit differently in the history of Paleontologian research, we would be talking about the Dent first theory of migration into North America. But that's not how it went down. So how this all went down is in 1927, Jesse Figgins was digging around at the Folsom site in New Mexico, and as he was digging, they were digging in to a load of extinct Ice Age bison, and as he was brushing away the dirt from the ribs of this bison, he uncovers this exquisite Folsom spear point embedded in the ribs. That'd be the shot up in the corner there. And so here he is sitting there digging through these Ice Age bison, and there is clearly a human-made artifact here. Beautiful spear point. And right there is proof that humans had been in North America at least since the last Ice Age. Suddenly human occupation in North America gets a lot deeper. So now we know that this thing has an age of around 10,800 years ago. This was, like I said, the first acceptance of early occupation in North America. And this sort of set up some of the norms for what happened later in the research when we start talking about pre-Clovis sites. He was smart about this in that he did not remove the spear point from the context that was found in. And he called everyone back down to check out this site. So all of these people came down to visit the site, saw the spear point in context, and there we had real good proof that people had been here for a very long time. We've since had very few things settled nearly as clean. Okay, so the next major site is the Blackwater Draw site. And this one's pretty critical. This is the Clovis type site. So this is where Clovis was first identified. And this was excavated in 1932 to 1936. And what happened here is, this is well before the time that we had radiocarbon dating. They were digging down, and they were digging through Folsom, and they got down through Folsom, and they found underneath the Folsom strata a very much different looking spear point. This is where they found their Clovis point. So here we, all right. So here we had good proof that we knew that Folsom was old, and we knew that Folsom says that people were here much longer, and now we're finding something below Folsom, which means that there was something here even earlier than that. Okay. So one of the other, and this is a little bit later. There are lots and lots and lots of Clovis sites now that we can talk about. I just brought this one in because it's useful for what I'm going to be saying next. But this is the Lemmer Mammoth Hill. We've got a bunch of mammoth, a bunch of big horse and tapir and bison associated with Clovis points. Great big kill site, great big butchery site. Lots of big critters associated. Well, looks like that can go a little bit big. Okay, so now let's go back to our familiar story. Okay, so we have Folsom in 1927. In about 1977, we get Paul Martens' Overkill hypothesis. And you can see how with the sites that have been discovered, the research that's been conducted, how it's very easy to look at it in terms of a big game focus. We have lots of Clovis points, lots of Folsom points, all associated with these large Pleistocene megafauna. So it seems to Martin that at this time, at about the same time that Clovis starts showing up, that lots of these great big megafauna seem to be going extinct. And it seems like this happens almost overnight. So Martin comes up with a theory that says that as the ice-free corridor opened up, Clovis hunters came spilling down through the ice-free corridor into North America, into this virgin wilderness. You might remember all of this from the beginning, right? So they come spilling into this where these giant megafauna have very little, if not any, fear of humans. They quickly spread out through this open, uninhabited area, killing megafauna as they go. And over a couple hundred years, they were able to spread out through North America and eventually all the way down to the tip of South America.
Clovis, like, what is it named after? Is it named the scientist, or is it?
In terms of Martin's Overkill?
Oh, no, like the layers, like the Clovis strata, the Folsom strata.
Okay, the Clovis is named after Clovis, New Mexico. It's the town that's closest to Blackwater Draw. Folsom is named after Folsom, New Mexico. So these are geographic names. Many of these types are named after either geographic locations, possibly people that saw them or found them first, things like that. So now we've got this image of these highly mobile big game hunters coming into North America, inhabiting the place, killing all the megafauna off, spreading out all over. Explains sort of the 500-year window for Clovis. Running down to the ice cream. So this might be a good time to talk about how, as an archaeologist, you get it. Okay, because this is sort of important, right? Dating is important. Okay, so it helps fill this alive at some point. In fact, it has to be. We archaeologists have to have our criteria, and living is good at some point, at least. And when we're testing this radiocarbon dating, we're looking at the ratio between carbon-14 and nitrogen-14. And we have a half-life of 5,730 years. So when we test something, if we find that there's a 1-to-1 ratio, there's 50% C14, 50% N14, here's the assumption that about 5,730 years have passed. Okay, now this does make some big assumptions. This assumes that the amount of carbon in the atmosphere is consistent. So this assumes that the amount of carbon in the atmosphere has stayed the same over the last 50,000 years or so. This assumes that organisms have the same ratio. So when we test an organism, we're assuming that they have just the C14 from the atmosphere. So there are a number of different dating conventions that go along with this, and different ways of recording dates. So we've got our before Christ, we've got our before current era, before present, radiocarbon years before present, or calibrated radiocarbon years before present. All of these things are recorded in. There's no standard. You find that when they're writing about this stuff, there's just no standard. But the important thing here is typically radiocarbon dates are younger in the beginning when I said something about Clovis being 11,500, it's actually more like 13,000 years ago. So 11,500 is more radiocarbon dating. 13,500 is more about the accepted years before present. Alright, so with more precise dating and more dates, we start to see a few cracks show up. This is a short-faced bear skeleton, by the way, articulated. If anyone was looking for a great donation to the zooarchaeology lab, these things are available online for $19,000. So you can line up. We'll take two. Okay, so when we're looking at this, these are all dates years before present, and these are the last date that we have for each of these individuals. And you'll see that there is a cluster, but this cluster is also right around the same time where there is extreme changes happening in the environment. And the idea that all of these critters went extinct by the hands of human hunters, you see it's rather prolonged over about a 4,000-year period. Some of the other interesting things that are going on around here is that even though the mammoth and mastodon and the short-faced bear are going extinct, we still have very large game animal around, such as the bison, moose, the grizzly bear starts coming in. So it doesn't quite fit that human hunters could have been responsible for, solely responsible for the extinction of all these critters. And then there's all this stuff below Clovis. What do we do with that? We got Monteverde, we got Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, we got Topper. Huh. Somehow Clovis doesn't seem, it's just not fitting very well anymore. Although, not that this isn't contentious, but let's go ahead. So, to start with, let's talk about Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. Okay, now this was first excavated in 1973 by James Ottavazio. Now, I talked about the peopling of America as being this, one of these things that some of it's associated with notoriety and the idea that maybe I can be first, maybe I can have the oldest, maybe I can have the best. But, James Ottavazio, his real passion is perishable technology. He didn't really much care about Paleo-Indians. He didn't really much care about the first Americans. So he starts digging into this rock shelter, really hoping to find a bunch of perishable goods. And he gets his radiocarbon dates back in 1975. And from stratum 2A, go ahead. And that's this deepest column over here. And you can see the size of the rock shelter. It's very impressive rock shelter. He's a meticulous excavator. And so he gets his radiocarbon dates back. Looks at him and he says, damn. The lowest one comes back at 17,000 years. Now other people have tried to bring forward pre-Clovis sites. And it didn't turn out very well for them. It's kind of an understatement. So Meadowcroft, here you can see this is the lowest excavation point. And that's the stratum 2A there at 17,650 plus or minus 2,400. He's got a few other better dates out there as well, with less of an error margin. But so he publishes this, saying, I did good science, I excavated this appropriately, and he gets hammered. He may still be getting hammered, but this site has produced articles with the wonderful title of "Yes, Virginia, it really is that old." So this is one of those that he was criticized for artifacts not being artifacts. He was criticized for coal contamination in his radiocarbon dates. Pretty much you name it, he's been criticized. Now, to be fair, well, we have seen a lot of material published on Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, and for the most part, it seems like the archaeological community is accepting it. He still has not produced a monograph on this site, so there are still some questions associated. Okay, so next, 1977. This is 2 years after James Arvazio published his date. Tom Delahaye starts digging down in Chile, and comes up with this really amazing site in Monteverde. Okay, so Monteverde, he gets a 14,000-year-old radiocarbon date. Again, well before Clovis. And one of the really interesting things about Monteverde is that the preservation is very good, and there are really an incredible assemblage of perishable materials down there. And there are medicinal plants, there are edible species of plants, there are coastal resources that have been imported like 50 kilometers. We see this really rich archaeological assemblage coming out of Monteverde. And the idea there, the real difficulty there is that if Clovis people had come through the ice-free corridor, even giving some dating issues, saying, maybe the date isn't quite right, maybe the standard error there is still incorporating Clovis, they would have had to travel all the way from the ice-free corridor, so from Alaska, down to the tip of South America. And then be there long enough to establish a fairly impressive adaptation to the region. This doesn't quite hold up. Now this site is a site that is well accepted by the archaeologists. These are some of the artifacts that came from it. Lots of cordage, the bellows, strings, and stones. Really an amazing site. So, some of the more recent ones now that are coming out here. Cactus Hill. Discovered in 1993. Also with a 16,000-year, 17,000-year-old radiocarbon date. We start finding blades in this sort of indistinct triangular point, somewhere to 7 to 20 centimeters below the Clovis horizon. Now this has been contentious. A lot of people have talked about artifacts moving, that the dates are not correct, that it's really all just the same assemblage, that it's all Clovis. Then we get another site. Okay, so now we've got Copper in South Carolina, where again we've got Clovis, or we've got artifacts, blade-like looking artifacts below the Clovis horizon. And we got a date of about 16,000 to 20,000 years ago. So we're starting to build this collection of pre-Clovis sites that don't seem to look like they want to go away. And as much criticism and attention as they've received, they're still with us. And they still seem to be relatively acceptable. Okay, so down at the bottom of Copper, there's this sort of really funny date here. They say potentially a 50,000-year-old date. Now, I don't know what you say about that. I haven't seen much else written about that. The earlier dates most people are willing to look at and accept. The 50,000-year-old date is a little harder to swallow. Who knows? It's there. So now Stanford and Bradley started thinking about things. You remember our little Cactus Hill triangular point there? Okay, that's up in the top left-hand corner. The next one is the Miller Point from Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. Next one, we've got a couple of different styles there, all the way up into some of the later Alaska Flute stuff. It's more around 10,000 years ago. So they're not really saying that this is the way that things went, but they are suggesting that if we start looking at this morphology here, we might be actually seeing a precursor for Clovis technologies coming around. So now in 2004, Stanford and Bradley published an article about the solution. And myself and many of the other people who read this article at that point in time sort of smirked at it. Thought it was an interesting new approach. But it turns out it's not even that new of an approach. In 1962, Paul Smith also wrote an article talking about a Solutrean connection to Clovis. He followed it up with another article, I believe in 65, talking about a fluted point out of the Old World, meaning out of a Solutrean assemblage. And what they're really looking at, so finding the amount of overpass flaking in both Clovis and the Solutrean assemblages, sort of what they started pointing at in terms of thinking about a connection between Europe and North America. But there were some problems with it at that point. People were saying that, well, there's 7,000 years or so separating Solutrean folk in Europe and Clovis people. There's no way that they could be.
I'm a little confused. So we're talking about potentially having people coming in from Europe. Are we talking about going across on the Atlantic side? Is that
yes?
It's going to go through this Iceland, Greenland, it's a land bridge, an ice bridge.
Be more of an ice bridge.
Yeah.
Boats would likely be involved. Let's keep going here for a second. I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So here we have this flaking technology, this flaking technique that is present in both. And we don't necessarily see the same flaking technique coming out of some of the Alaskans that is proposed as a progenitor. There's also a significant blade technology associated with both of these technologies as well. So when we look at, over here we have a comparison of a Solutrean laurel leaf, that's the pointed one, and the Clovis biface. You can see some of the similarities in the flaking technique. Now, in 2004 when this all came out, we were like, okay, great, you've made us a good story. Show us something. Show us some evidence. Okay? You got flakes, whatever. Show us something. So they come out with the Sinmar biface here. They're claiming about an 18,000-year-old date for this. Looks a lot like the Solutrean point. But there's issues with this point as well, because this point was dredged up off the bottom of the Atlantic with the Mammoth at the same time. So, technically, I suppose they're associated, right? They were both dredged up at the same time. Both might have come from the same place. It's hard to say. I looked for another image, and I wasn't able to find an image of this one. Off the coast of Virginia, there's this place called Eppie Island, and there is a 17th century homestead that some people were doing some archaeological work on there. And as they were digging down through, and specifically they were moving this clay chimney out. And underneath the clay chimney, they found a bipointed biface, very similar to this one. And testing has since demonstrated it was made out of French flint. So now we have French flint, a laurel leaf biface, off of Virginia. Now a lot of people would say, "That's it! That's what we were looking for! That's the piece!" Well, people have been picking up projectile points for hundreds of years, thousands of years. So it's very hard to say whether that piece there came over with some of the first Americans, or if it came over with 17th century settlers. It's very difficult to say. So, and also, I can't confirm its existence other than hearsay. I haven't found any pictures of it, and you would think that if someone had that they'd want to provide us with some pictures. So, what do you do with that one? Kind of interesting. All right, so how'd they get here then? All right, so we got the Atlantic ice sheet coming down. We do have enough information about the Solutrean, although our archaeological knowledge of the Solutrean is not very good. But we do have some knowledge that they did have some maritime adaptation. They were living down on the coast, down in Spain. We see some laurel leaf bifaces coming off of Britain. So how'd they get here? Did they have boats? Did they walk across the ice? Maybe they flew. I don't know. But there seems to be actually some relatively good evidence for boats. So you can see this would be the route they'd be moving through across the around the edge of the Atlantic ice sheet there. And some of the things that we do know is that 40, 50,000 years ago we had people in Australia. We've got these funny pictographs here out of Spain. These have been interpreted in a number of ways. The dots there have been interpreted as rivers or water. The rectangular sorts of things have been interpreted as actually skin boats. So it turns out that when you oil up a skin boat and you shine some light behind it, you can see the ribbing in the boat through the skin. One of the other pieces of the... Oh, I'm sorry. Sure.
I've noticed in every map you've had, none of them include the migration by boat along the Pacific coast.
Oh, I'm getting there.
Okay, I'll be patient.
This Atlantic stuff is some of the most recent stuff to be released, and there hasn't. We saw a couple articles in 2004, 2005 about this. We saw a little back and forth about the journals, and in that time, in those articles, there really wasn't a lot of, at least what I considered meat in those articles. Very recently now, in February 2012, Stanford and Bradley then released their book, Across the Atlantic Ice, where they have a little bit more in there that they're talking about. Some of it's getting a little bit more convincing. There still hasn't been a whole lot of information about this published. So we're still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Still waiting for a little bit of review to happen here, or a lot of review to happen. Anyway, so this is one of the other things, pieces of evidence that they use to talk about the potential of boats in the North Atlantic. Okay, so this projectile point here that you see is a Paleo-Indian projectile point, and it's made out of very specific chert. It's made out of Rama Bay chert. Okay. Rama Bay is way the heck up there where the arrow starts. There's only one place to get Rama Bay chert, and that's from this quarry up out of Rama Bay. And in later times they used this, and it was an epic journey, one of those coming of age things to go up there and collect the Rama Bay chert. But here we have roughly a 12,000-year-old Paleo-Indian point associated with, or made out of the Rama Bay chert. Now this is a projectile point that Stephen Loring found in his analysis when he was looking at the association of Paleo-Indian points with the Sea of Champlain. So somewhere between roughly 14,000 and I think it's about 11,000 got the Sea of Champlain. And it appears that at that point in time there was a maritime adapted Paleo-Indian group living around this area, exploiting whales, walruses, seals, the sorts of things that you find in an inland sea. And it appears that they are making a projectile point out of Rama Bay chert. So, in this case, they either walked across the ice to go get it, or they took a boat. So, here's another timeline they're sort of suggesting the roughly an 18,000-year-old date for the Sinmar, and all of these different levels that you're looking up here are associated sea levels with those dates. So, combination of melting ice and isostatic rebound brings sea level up rather rapidly. And we see Sinmar being relatively low, Cactus Hill coming up, Clovis, and Crowfield. It's kind of pretty, huh?
Okay.
Stars the limit.
We just lost our. Okay.
Oh.
Let's try this again. But so, I have a question while we're making this work. So the idea is that you've got, 110 meter drop in sea level.
Sure.
Over 18,000 years. And so should we be looking underwater for our science?
Well, no. That's the million-dollar question there. One of those things that makes Paleo-Indian research kind of so much fun. One of the real difficulties is that really all of the really good evidence and the places where we'd be thinking about finding that really good evidence, much of it's underwater. So,
Question.
sure.
Well, I just wondered, I'm reading a book right now, 1491. I'm reading a book right now, 1491, and I wondered if you thought it's a Pearl Sea Man, and it's just about exactly this. So I just wondered if how do you find it as a source? Or, I mean, it's not a source, it's a kind of Michael Pollan style.
Well, it's a good read.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've read that book. As as I recall, though, he is okay. That's 1491. The other one was 1492, right? That was the China one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one there was looking at the development of Native Americans, and I don't recall exactly what he was saying about early Paleo-Indians.
He gave some really big numbers. He had some really big numbers in his book.
In terms of population or dates?
Yeah.
Well, population-wise, I mean, that's one of the things I look at is just the absolute number of projectile points that are running around. You know, there are an incredible number of artifacts. There's archaeology almost everywhere we look. And then when you really start tracking some of those numbers in terms of population, you know, earlier explorers were given very large numbers in terms of estimates of population. Later in the 1800s, we started seeing very small numbers in terms of population. So when you start looking at it, if you track the political history of it as well, you can see a pretty close correlation between the numbers that are being estimated and the political climate towards Native Americans. Me personally, I would lean towards the higher population numbers. Not have a real lot of problems with that. All right, so back again. So now he's saying that that actually we're having the wrong conversation. Okay, this is what this is from Bradley and Stanford here again, saying that actually what we're looking at is that there's Clovis and there was pre-Clovis. And then there was something here a hell of a lot longer before Clovis. And in his talk at the SAAs this last year, he uttered the phrase that it turns out that Clovis was actually middle-aged. So what do we take from this? Go ahead. What do we take from this, right? Okay, so there's all of these things that could be. There's all these different stories out there. There's a few pretty projectile points running around that we don't quite know where they came from. There's some pretty good evidence around, taken either way. I think that if there's something to walk away with out of this, that we need to think about our Paleo-Indian origins and the first Americans as being a lot more diverse. And one of the things that it seems that is in human nature is the urge to move. People have been moving for 100,000 years, going to places, sometimes just to go there, sometimes just to say they've been there. And when we start thinking about what has happened in the past, we have very good ideas now that Clovis was certainly not first. We have very good evidence now saying that people have been here for at least 17,000 years. Maybe a little older than that even. And now that we have broken through that 17, 18,000 year old date, it seems like we're getting people reporting 30,000 year old dates and 35,000 year old dates. We heard a lot of these dates being reported at the last Society for American Archaeology. Haven't seen them published yet, so it'd be good to see them published. But it turns out, I think that what we can say is Clovis was not first, and Was it a single migration? Did they come from a single place? I find that highly unlikely. So, let's go first.
Sure. Great.
Do you know, are archaeologists or people in the field such as yourself teaming up with more like evolutionary biologists to do sort of genetic analysis of people? Because I would guess that you might be able to tell, you know, if all Native Americans are descended from one group or from multiple groups that way.
Yes, they are. And that was a whole section of this research that I decided that I was not going to cover in this lecture. There is some really interesting stuff that's happening. Much of it is related to an Asian origin, but there's also discussion that a certain haplogroup came across from Europe as well. Some of the issues that we have with that is that our sample is really bad. You know, and so we're not really sure about how that goes. And when you start reading some of the articles, some of the more recent ones that have come out, Stanford and Bradley bring up this X haplogroup looking at that moving in from Europe. And there's an article critiquing their discussion of that genetic strain moving across. But when you look at the article, the research is quite similar. The numbers are quite similar. It's really the tone of the article that takes the difference. So you've got someone that is very much not a Clovis firster, but definitely believes in more of an Asian ancestry, that hammers them for even suggesting the idea. Personally, I'm not strong enough on my genetics to go in depth into what's going on there. But it is happening. It is out there, and it is pretty interesting.
How long does it take to make one of these, let's say a Clovis point, a spear point?
Well, you know, it really depends on how you're doing. One can answer that from a number of hours to a number of months. A really good napper can probably knock one of these out in an hour or two, as long as they don't screw it up. I'd be more a month or so, because I got to take a couple different swings at it.
And do you think that for a good napper is the failure rate? I mean, still like 90%? Is it 50%? Is it?
Archaeological records, the failure rate is pretty high. I don't know exact percentages, but it's over half.
And have people found sort of like little not factories, but sort of areas where people have lived and have been spending a lot of time in that area? With lots of,
Absolutely. There's lithic scatters all over the place. There's one of the places that I was at 2 summers ago out in Wyoming is the Black Mountain Archaeological District. And there we have a rock shelter that has Folsom remains in the rock shelter. And there is a thick scatter of debitage across most of the landscape up there. It's pretty impressive.
And not to monopolize this, but I assume that, because again, everyone thinks about the ice cap, the northern ice cap. So Antarctica, no possibility of South Africa crossing over to. Could there have been anything about a connection with that there, or is it just too far away?
Well, I mean, people have suggested it, that maybe come across from Australia, but again, tell me something. Okay, so we know we've got people in Australia, but in terms of actually connecting that up to South America, I haven't seen anything.
But in terms of what we know about the glaciation, would there have been a continuous connection, a continuous ice ridge between, let's say, Australia and South America at the peak?
Is there any sign of any type of civilization, or do we just have these nomadic appearing sites where people stop for a while?
And in terms of early paleo?
Yeah.
Well, no, that's a rough question there. You know, I mean, what do you call a civilization? You know, I mean, you can place a lot of. Are you talking about? Do you have a highly mobile hunter-gatherer culture? Yeah, for the most part you do. But on the East Coast, we also see some very, very large Paleogean sites that seem to be potentially either staging areas or gathering areas. You know, we have a pretty impressive culture. If you start equating the projectile point type of culture, we've got a spread of these fluted projectile points across North America in a few hundred years, and they are spread from coast to coast. They're found all over the place. So there's certainly something about these projectile points. There's something that was happening there. We see, you know, stone moving in a variety of different areas in relatively long distances. Do we see something like Egyptian pyramids going up at that point? Do we see them harnessing mammoths like 10,000 BC? No, we don't necessarily see that. So they're a civilization. We've got a relatively low population.
So there's something like a laying of bones in a certain way, anything like that to indicate what the culture did for, say, burials, things like that.
Oh, certainly. The Spirit Caveman is 11,500 years old. It was laid down in a bundle there. Part of the issue that we have with a lot of this stuff, though, is that we just don't have it. Like Kennewick Man is one of the most famous Paleogean skeletons that we have. But he was a relatively late Paleogean, and he washed out of the riverbank. So any context that we had there in terms of talking about where Kennewick Man came from, it's gone. We don't have it. You know, it washed down, and then it was buried by the Army Corps of Engineers under a couple hundred ton of rock. You know, even in the Spirit Caveman, I mean, it was a situation where it was a bulldozer operator that started to scrape through part of the burial. Saw the bundle, decided that maybe we should stop. There has been written some things about ritual use of this is up in Canada. This is talking about ritual use of ravens. So, you know, yeah, I think that 13,000 years ago, the folk that were running around here were extremely advanced.
You mentioned that one piece had been dredged up from the Atlantic.
That was the Sinmar projectile point, bipointed Solutrean.
Was that just they happened to be dredging something up anywhere, or were they looking for it, or were they
dredging scallops? I think.
Dredging scallops. Okay.
Yeah. So running a dredge along the bottom of the ocean, and up comes this chunk of mammoth and a laurel leaf projectile. You know, again, are they associated? Can you really say 18,000 years? You know, how did it get there? Why, you know, what's it doing? What's it associated with? Is it really 18,000 years ago? You know, could this be something, you know, like something that fell off a mid-archaic boat? So it's like 5,000 years ago. We don't know. So there's some definite questions there as to where that came from. I mean, that's the thing, is the context is really everything. Sure.
So, like you said, you knew one place where they were dredging off the Atlantic, and of course there's the dredging off the Queen Charlotte Islands in Canada. I Are there any other places where they're dredging the continental shelves looking for artifacts?
I don't think that there's... Okay, let me qualify this. I don't think in those cases, in most of those cases, they're actually dredging for artifacts.
Well, the Queen Charlotte Islands, they were.
Okay. Now, there is a research project that's ongoing around the coast of Florida that James Ottavazio and I don't remember the other guy's name, where they are actually looking at these submerged river channels, looking for areas where there may be chert outcroppings exposed that would have been dry at the last glacial maximum. And they're looking for chert that would be a potential area or potential focus, thinking about how they might focus in on an underwater site and increase the probability that they might hit an archaeological site. The problem with dredging is that, okay, so you may get that artifact, you may pull that up off the seafloor, but in dredging you lose all of that context. You know, it's the same reason why archaeologists don't like it when artifacts wander off out of an archaeological site. We lose that context.
So you'd almost have to use the same techniques as they do seem to have some sort of technique they use.
Sure, they
to get down there and look for things.
Sure, they use a side scan sonar and run over the base. They also use historic records to sort of triangulate in on where a wreck might be. But on the other hand, looking for a shipwreck is very much different than looking for a hunter-gatherer site. You know, if we're looking for a Spanish galleon, a side scan sonar is fantastic. You can get really great resolution off of that, and you can get a pretty good sense of it, and you can send your ROVs down, and that's great. A side scan sonar will pick this up off the ground. So this is too small for it to register. So most of what we find in an archaeological site, in those terms, aren't necessarily going to be picked up in those sorts of techniques.
What kind of technology do you have to find artifacts? Can you detect closed points above ground without actually digging into the soil?
Depends on where you're at. Much of the archaeology that happens out west is a surface archaeology. So you walk transects, you use your eyes, and hope that you find something coming out.
I guess I misphrased my question. Can you actually see things under the ground? Is there technology to find buried artifacts?
Allow me to take that question. There is a technique called ground penetrating radar. And yes, you can see things, but there's a trade-off. It uses microwaves, radar, that are various sizes. And the longer the wavelength, the deeper you can go, but the less resolution you have. Yes, you can find buttons and all sorts of things by the radar signature, but you can't go down very deep. And it also depends on the substrate. More later. Thank you. Sorry to intrude.
No problem. But you know, like what you're finding in Indiana, that the Clovis era sediments are very deep.
They can be, depending upon the position. They can also be at the surface in some instances, particularly where you might have some erosion that is occurring. But you can also be deeply buried 13, 14 meters where we have deposition of certain kinds of sediments. And that's often part of the problem in prospecting for this kind of age. When you're going back over 10,000 years, you have huge potential for wind-blown sediments and water-brought sediments to really bury these sites. There's not much you can do. We do not have a technology that will allow us to go deep like that. There are a couple of other technologies that can tell us where the ground has been burnt, for instance. But again, if you don't utilize the equipment at the proper depths, you're going to miss it because you're only looking at one depth at one time. So it's like what people are trying to do now is narrow down the landform where these sites might occur. And in a way, what you've done is narrowed down, and you now have the haystack within which there might be a needle. In the future, it might be different.
And also in this area, there's the trouble with glacial action, especially outwash from the big rivers. People tend to like to live along rivers, and it's very, very mobile kind of landform. You get covered up, you get cut away. That's how you found Kendall.
Yep. So, in many of these cases, we just hope we get lucky.
But you do. There are places. Kent actually found a place up in northern Ohio where there was a karst feature which sequestered something.
Fell through.
And we found in northern Indiana a great sinkhole full of tertiary fauna, which there's none other that we know of around here. They found a short-faced cave bear just down the road in a road cut on 37, and a saber-toothed cat skull. So there are little niches of safety, but they're few and far between, and as far as I know, they're impossible to tell from the surface. It's just a happenstance.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in Wyoming, this, going back to Wyoming, this is where I work, you know, we have natural track name, and we've got 100,000 years of fauna built up in that one, but we don't have any cultural out of that. It's all natural fauna. So, you know, there's a great record, there's a great environmental record, but archaeologically, you know, certainly it helps us to have that sort of environmental information, but we don't have anything in there about, you know, human occupation.
Is there any paleontology that's been done on this? Is that useful at all?
Pardon?
The seeds.
No, honestly, I haven't really.
And I actually did some work on Meadowcroft, and yeah, there's coal in that crap. And the coal is very old carbon, it's dead, and it really pushes your ages back. So Meadowcroft I'm a little skeptical about. I don't know about the other ones.
Well, and that's the thing is that, you know, we get a lot of back and forth about Meadowcroft in the articles, and you know, it's like, is the archaeological community just accepting Meadowcroft because Adavadio is pretty stubborn and hard-nosed and not